Today, we're diving into something really personal. We're opening up one man's diary to follow his incredibly raw and detailed journey through laser eye surgery. But trust me, this isn't just a medical story. It's a story about fear, about frustration, and about the really surprising reasons we sometimes choose to permanently change our own bodies. So let's get right into it.
So let me just ask you this straight up. Would you let a surgeon operate on your eyes as a way to get ready for a war? It's a pretty intense question, right? I mean, for most of us, laser eye surgery is about convenience, maybe ditching your glasses. But for the guy whose story we're following, the reason was way more primal than that. It was all about survival.
So what on earth pushes someone to voluntarily have lasers reshape their corneas? Well, in this case, it had nothing to do with swimming or playing sports. Nope. This was a calculated move, made during a time of peace, to get ready for a future that, well, might not be so peaceful.
And this is it, right here, the heart of the matter, straight from his diary. He didn't see his glasses as a helpful tool. He saw them as a weakness, a vulnerability, just a fragile piece of gear that, in a true worst-case scenario, could be the thing that gets you killed. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to get rid of that risk while I still can.
Now, this wasn't just some abstract fear he was cooking up in his head. It was rooted in his everyday life. Look at this. This is his actual prescription. He had moderate myopia, so he was nearsighted, and a bit of astigmatism. It's not like he was legally blind or anything, but it was absolutely enough to make the world a total blur without his glasses. And that is a dangerous way to be if you ever find yourself needing to run for your life. Okay, so once he made the decision, phase 2 began, trying to navigate the incredibly complex and, let's be honest, overwhelming world of laser eye surgery. It wasn't just one option, it was a whole menu of procedures, and every single one came with its own set of pros, cons, and some frankly terrifying animations on YouTube.
He eventually narrowed it down to these 3 big contenders. First up, you've got trans-PRK. This is a no-flap surgery where the laser just goes to work right on the surface of your eye. The big selling point? It's tough as nails, great against impact. The downside? The recovery is absolutely brutal. Then there's LASIK, the one everyone's heard of. They create a little flap on your cornea, kind of like lifting a page in a book, and do the work underneath. Recovery is way faster, but that flap, it can be a weak spot forever. And finally, there's SMILE. It's the new kid on the block. Super minimally invasive, kind of like keyhole surgery for your eye, and it promises the fastest recovery of them all.
This table really lays out the tough choice he was facing. I mean, think about it. His whole goal was to prepare for a physical struggle, which totally pushed him towards trans-PRK because of its incredible impact resistance. But choosing that meant signing up for the longest recovery time and the most pain after the operation. So the question became, was that long-term durability really worth weeks, maybe even months, of a miserable healing process?
And just to make things even more complicated, his own biology threw a wrench in the works. These are his actual corneal scans. And what they showed was that his corneas were exceptionally thick. We're talking over 560 micrometers. His doctor literally told him his corneas were thick enough for 3 separate surgeries. So what did that mean? It meant he was a perfect candidate for any of the procedures, which left the incredibly difficult choice entirely up to him.
And man, this diary entry just captures his dilemma perfectly. See, with trans-PRK, that surface laser, you have to be super careful about protecting your eyes from UV light for months. Otherwise, you risk getting this thing called corneal haze. Doing it in the middle of summer felt like a huge gamble. But waiting all the way until winter, that felt like putting his new life on hold. He was completely torn, ending his diary entry with a string of the Chinese character for difficult. In the end, he chose the hard road, trans-PRK, right in the middle of May.
So he'd done all the research, he'd weighed all the options, and he'd booked the appointment. The only thing left to do was to actually walk into that clinic and lie down under that laser. This was it, the point of no return. May 21st, just a simple date on the calendar, but for him, it would become this profound dividing line in his life. There was the world before the surgery and the world after. On the morning of the surgery, that deep existential dread just hit him like a ton of bricks. He actually wrote this on the way to the hospital. All that logical prep work, all the research, it couldn't erase this fundamental primal fear. He was willingly putting himself in what felt like harm's way, breaking his own lifelong rule of never taking unnecessary risks. The procedure itself was, well, it was a lot. An intense, visceral, sensory experience. He was awake, he was totally aware, and as he wrote down later, you can literally smell the tissue of your own cornea being vaporized by the laser.
Just imagine that. An unforgettable and deeply, deeply unsettling sensation. So the surgery itself was over in minutes. But the real challenge, the true test of his decision, oh, that was only just beginning. Welcome to the recovery. As soon as the anesthetic wore off, the reality of his situation just came crashing down. He said his eyes ached like they'd been filled with smoke. He couldn't even read the addresses on his phone to call a ride home. He had to crank up the text size on all his devices to the absolute maximum, what he called elderly mode. Even something as simple as untying a knot on a food bag was completely impossible. And then this weird dizziness set in, this kind of motion sickness he hadn't felt since he was a kid playing video games for the first time. This quote right here, it just perfectly captures the mundane torture of the recovery. It wasn't just about the physical pain, it was about the complete loss of control. He couldn't browse a food delivery menu because the words were just a fuzzy mess. So he was trapped, just reordering the exact same meal from his history day after day until he was absolutely sick of it. It's a small detail, I know, but it's such a powerful symbol of how helpless he felt. And then, 2 days in, came this moment of just pure terror. After dealing with all the frustration and the discomfort, his right eye just suddenly blurred over. And in that one moment, all the doctor had told him, all the reassurances, it all just vanished. It was replaced by this one single, horrifying thought. Am I going blind? You can just feel the sheer panic in his diary entry. So the first 5 days were an absolute emotional and physical roller coaster. On day 2, he could barely make out a license plate just a few feet in front of him. On day 3, he wakes up and that terrifying blurriness from the night before is gone. Huge relief, right? But the fear that it could come back at any moment just lingered. Day 4 was a constant battle with his vision going in and out of focus, just constantly dripping artificial tears into his eyes. And then came day 5, time to get the protective bandage lenses removed. He thought this would be a moment of triumph, but he described it as pure agony. The second they came out, his eyes were in so much pain he couldn't even open them for 5 whole minutes. It was a searing sensation that threw him right back to how he felt moments after the surgery. But here's the paradox. The eye chart test showed his vision was already pretty good, almost 20/25. But what he was actually experiencing was a total sensory assault. He wrote that every white object outside seemed to glow, so intensely bright that it was physically painful and gave him headaches. So his new vision had arrived, but his brain had absolutely no idea how to process it yet. So getting those bandaged lenses out was a huge milestone, for sure. But it was definitely not the finish line. No, the journey from just seeing to seeing well was going to take a lot longer. A month and a half after the procedure, there were still major issues. This is the reality of a long trans-PRK recovery. His astigmatism was really bad. Every single point of light had this faint double image. In work meetings, he couldn't clearly read the words on a presentation screen because of this weird ghosting effect. The world was finally in focus, sure, but it wasn't sharp at all. And this message he sent to his clinic really shows that the healing process, it's not just a straight line. 5 months after surgery, he wrote them saying that while the double vision had gotten better, things were suddenly feeling less clear again. So even after all that time, any little setback felt like he was sliding backwards, and that anxiety would just come rushing right back. He was still worried. But then, finally, at the 6-month mark, the breakthrough happened. One day, he just realized he wasn't constantly reaching for his eye drops. He looked at the streetlights, and the ghosting was just gone. He had, at long last, reached a state of normalcy. He'd actually forgotten that constant awareness of his eyes, forgotten what post-op even felt like. He had finally arrived. You know, in the end, this whole ordeal, all the research, the fear, the pain, the months and months of blurry recovery, it was all for an idea. It was all to remove a single point of failure, to prepare for a future that might never even happen. And it leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about. What vulnerabilities do we all live with, and what price are we willing to pay, what ordeal are we willing to go through to get our own sense of peace of mind?